Hello, my name is Alyssa, and I'm 32 years old. I serve as an officer in the United States Navy, a place where discipline is carved into your bones, where storms are faced head-on, and where fear is something you learn to control, not allowed to control you. Out there on the open sea, with the wind slapping against your face and the deck rolling beneath your boots, you learn exactly who you are. But nothing, not the long deployments, not the relentless training, not even the worst storms I've faced at sea, prepared me for the storm waiting for me inside my own home. I used to believe that the Navy had already taught me everything I needed to survive. But the truth I learned later was painfully simple. Some battles aren't fought in uniform, some battles are fought in the heart, behind closed doors, where no one can hear you scream. My story doesn't begin with trauma, though. It begins with hope. Dangerous, blinding hope. The kind that makes you ignore the small cracks forming underneath your feet until they turn into earthquakes. When I married Derek, I genuinely believed I was walking into a partnership, two adults building a life side by side. He used to say he admired my strength, my dedication, my career. We met at a time in my life when everything felt stable. I had just completed a successful deployment, earned another promotion, and returned home feeling proud of what I'd built. Derek, with his charming smile and soft-spoken nature, seemed like the kind of man who valued a woman with ambition. I didn't know then that admiration can sometimes turn into resentment, and love can sometimes twist itself into control. But before I talk about the marriage, I want to tell you something else, something important. If you had seen me during training, covered in sweat, holding a 60-pound pack while running across uneven terrain, you would have said, "This woman can survive anything." Yet the bruises no one saw, the ones buried under silence, confusion, and emotional exhaustion, were heavier than anything I carried in uniform. People often assume that strength is loud, that it looks like shouting back, or slamming doors, or walking away dramatically. But sometimes strength is quiet. Sometimes it's the way you keep breathing when your home becomes a battlefield. Sometimes it's the way you hold on to yourself when everyone around you tries to rewrite who you are. In the early days of my marriage, I kept convincing myself that everything was fine, that the uneasiness inside me was just fatigue from deployments, or maybe I just needed time to adjust to being part of a family again. Derek's parents, Diane and Frank, welcomed me with polite smiles and compliments that felt just a little too rehearsed. Something about the way they looked at me lingered in my mind, but I ignored it. I had spent years away from civilian marriage life, so I told myself I was simply overthinking. What I didn't realize was that the storm had already begun forming quietly around me. Looking back now, there were signs, small, delicate signs, so easy to miss, but so loud in hindsight. The way Diane's smile tightened every time I mentioned work. The way Frank asked questions that sounded less like curiosity and more like judgment. The way Derek's body stiffened when I talked about another deployment. But I brushed it all aside. I believed in love. I believed in marriage. And most of all, I believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But life has a brutal way of showing you the truth, slow at first, then all at once. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something before the real story begins. I didn't walk into this relationship weak. I didn't stay because I was afraid. I stayed because I believed people could change, misunderstandings could be resolved, and families could grow together. I stayed because I thought that love was enough. But love isn't enough, not when it becomes a cage you're too exhausted to escape from. So this is the story of how I lost myself, how I fought to get back up, and how I learned that surviving isn't the same as living. This is the story of the marriage that broke me and the freedom that rebuilt me. And it all began long before the night Derek's anger finally turned into violence. It began with the little storms, the ones inside the walls of our home, that I kept convincing myself would pass. They didn't. When I think back to how my marriage with Derek began, it almost feels like I'm replaying someone else's life, an old memory that doesn't match the reality I later lived. We met during a time when everything in my world seemed to be falling neatly into place. I had returned from a deployment feeling stronger than ever, both mentally and physically. My career was on a steady rise, and I finally felt ready to share my life with someone. Derek stepped into that space with perfect timing, Gentle smiles, careful words, and an understanding demeanor that felt rare. He used to tell me he admired my dedication to the Navy. He said he respected independent women and that he was proud to be with someone who served her country. Those words meant something to me. They felt sincere. And maybe, at that time, they were. We dated for almost a year before getting married, and in that year, I genuinely believed I had found a partner who would walk with me through every storm. When I first met Derek's parents, Diane and Frank, they greeted me with warm expressions and polite gestures. Diane hugged me like she had known me for years, and Frank shook my hand firmly, telling me he appreciated women in uniform. Their home felt inviting: freshly baked bread, framed family photos, and a neatly arranged living room that smelled faintly of lavender. Diane insisted on cooking dinner for us, and Frank spent most of the evening asking about my deployments, pretending to be fascinated. At that time, I mistook their curiosity for affection. I didn't realize it was assessment. Our wedding day was simple but beautiful. Derek looked at me like I was the only person in the room. His parents sat in the front row, smiling, clapping, and acting like they were thrilled to have me as their daughter-in-law. For a while, everything did feel perfect. We moved into a modest home close to my naval base. I still remember the first week. Derek helping me unpack my uniforms, Diane calling every morning just to check in, and Frank dropping by with groceries or tools, saying he wanted to help us settle in. But slowly, very slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. It started with tiny comments, so small they were easy to ignore. Diane saying things like, "You work such long hours, dear. Derek must feel lonely." Or Frank joking, "Navy women are tough, sometimes too tough." Comments that made me pause for a moment, but not enough to worry. Derek would brush them off, telling me his parents didn't mean anything by it. Then came the subtle comparisons. Diane would casually mention that she never left her husband alone for days, or that real wives made sure dinner was ready even when they had busy schedules. Frank would comment on the bills, saying things like, "It must be hard for Derek to manage things when you're out at sea." I told myself these were harmless remarks, old-fashioned thinking from an older generation. I was wrong. The real shift happened when Diane and Frank began visiting our home more frequently. At first, it felt nice, family dropping by, sharing meals, bringing over desserts. But soon, their unannounced visits became routine. They walked into our home, as if it belonged to them. Diane would reorganize my kitchen cabinets, without asking. Frank would comment on the furniture I chose, or the way I decorated the living room. Derek never stopped them. In fact, he seemed to enjoy their presence more than he enjoyed mine. Whenever I gently pointed out that we needed boundaries, Derek would say, "They're just trying to help, Alyssa. Why are you being so sensitive?" His tone wasn't harsh, not yet. But it carried a subtle shift, an edge that hadn't been there before. Looking back, that was the beginning of the unspoken hierarchy forming in our home. Derek and his parents on one side and me on the other. The marriage still looked perfect from the outside: pretty photos, polite smiles, family dinners, a stable home. But inside, the cracks were forming. They were thin at first, like faint lines running across glass. Yet I could feel them growing, stretching wider with every unspoken tension. I simply didn't know then that those cracks were the early warnings of a storm far more destructive than anything I had ever faced. The first time Diane hinted at my salary, it sounded innocent enough, almost like a casual question asked out of curiosity. We were sitting at the dining table in her home, having Sunday lunch. Derek was talking to Frank about something unimportant when Diane leaned closer to me, lowering her voice like she was sharing a harmless secret. "So, Alyssa, Navy must pay well, right?" I smiled politely and gave her a vague answer. "It's enough to live comfortably." She nodded, but something in her expression shifted, just a subtle tightening around her eyes, a flicker of calculation. At the time, I thought I imagined it. I didn't know I had just opened a door she would spend months trying to force all the way open. The real pressure began quietly. A comment here, a suggestion there. Frank asked one evening, "Since your job is stable, wouldn't it make sense for you to contribute a little more to the household? Derek works hard, but men get tired too, you know." The words were soft, but the intention was sharp. A few days later, Diane added, "You're hardly home because of your shifts. At least let the family benefit from your salary. It's only fair." Family. That word took on a different meaning in their mouths, less about unity, more about entitlement. I approached Derek, hoping he would understand how uncomfortable these conversations made me. Instead, he sighed deeply, like I was the one creating a problem. "Alyssa, they're just trying to help us plan better. Why do you always assume the worst?" I didn't reply, but a knot formed in my stomach that didn't go away. Days passed, and what began as casual comments turned into organized pressure. Diane would bring up finances every time she visited. Frank repeatedly insisted that successful marriages require financial transparency. Derek began echoing them, word for word. Then came the night that changed everything. We were sitting in the living room, and Derek suddenly asked me for access to my Navy bank account. Just like that. As if it was the most natural thing in the world. "What?" I stared at him, thinking I misheard. He repeated it calmly, almost rehearsed. "Give me your banking details. Mom and Dad think it's time we pooled our income. It will keep things balanced." Balanced? What balance? "I'm already contributing," I reminded him gently. "Bills, groceries, home repairs, everything is split." "That's not the point, Alyssa," he snapped, the calmness evaporating. "You earn more than me. It makes sense that you support the household more." I froze. It wasn't a request that shocked me. It was the entitlement behind it. The complete lack of respect. The way my salary, my hard-earned money, had suddenly become a family resource instead of something I controlled. I said no. Not angrily. Not disrespectfully. Just firmly and honestly. Derek stared at me like I had committed some unforgivable betrayal. And from that moment, everything changed. Diane saw my refusal as a personal insult. She started calling me selfish. Frank began making comments about women who prioritize careers over family. Derek became colder, more distant, more irritated by every little thing I did. I felt like I was living inside a house built on expectations I never agreed to. Meals became silent battlegrounds. Phone calls turned into interrogations. Every smile from Diane held judgment behind it. Every word from Frank carried accusation. And Derek, he slowly transformed from the man I married to someone I barely recognized. He criticized my schedule, my spending, even my tone of voice. Whenever he snapped at me, Diane defended him. Whenever he disrespected me, Frank justified it. I kept telling myself it was just stress, that they were trying to adjust, that I needed to keep the peace. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The salary demands weren't about money. They were about control. About shrinking me until I no longer resembled the independent woman Derek once claimed to admire. What I didn't know then was that this pressure, the emotional suffocation, the subtle manipulation was only the beginning. The storm was still gathering strength. Some nights stay carved into your memory forever, not because you want to remember them, but because your mind refuses to forget. The night everything fell apart began like an ordinary evening, which somehow made it so much worse. Ordinary moments shouldn't turn into nightmares. But this one did. Diane and Frank had come over for dinner. Uninvited, as usual. Diane walked around my kitchen like she owned the place, lifting lids, criticizing seasoning, rearranging drawers I had organized that very morning. Frank sat at the table reading through our mail as if it were addressed to him. Derek didn't see anything wrong with it. He never did. We sat down for dinner, the air thick with things left unsaid. Derek's jaw was tight. Diane's eyes were sharp. Frank looked like he was waiting for a cue. I could feel it building, the way sailors sense a storm long before it hits shore. Something was coming. It began when Frank cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair like a judge about to announce a verdict. "Alyssa," he said in a falsely calm voice, "we've discussed this as a family, and we think it's time you hand over your salary." I put my fork down slowly. "Hand it over to who?" "To us," Diane snapped before Frank could speak. "To the family. It's the right thing to do." My chest tightened. "I contribute already." Bills, groceries, repairs, everything. That's not enough, Derek said sharply. You make more. You should give more. I looked at Derek, searching for the man I married, but his eyes were cold, reflecting his parents' expectations, not our marriage. Give more or control less? I asked softly. Diane slammed her hand on the table. Don't twist things. We're helping you build a proper home. But you, she jabbed a finger toward me, are acting like some independent queen who doesn't understand family responsibility. My voice stayed calm, though my hands trembled. My salary is mine. I earned it. I won't hand it over. The silence that followed was so sharp, it hurt. Diane leaned back and let out a slow, mocking chuckle. There it is. Navy women. Full of pride. No respect for their husbands. No respect for elders. Frank nodded. Exactly why daughters-in-law like you ruin homes. I turned to Derek. You're really okay with this? Instead of answering, Derek pushed his chair back and stood up. You're acting ridiculous, Alyssa. Just do what they're asking. Stop making everything difficult. Derek, I whispered, this is wrong. You know it's wrong. He moved closer, too close. His face twisted in anger I had never seen before. You think your uniform makes you better than us? You think your job gives you the right to disrespect my parents? I'm not disrespecting anyone. I'm just protecting what's mine. That was all it took. Derek's hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of my hair. The pain was immediate and blinding. He yanked me backward so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. I gasped, reaching up instinctively to free myself, but his grip only tightened. Don't ever talk back to me again, he yelled, pulling harder. My scalp burned, tears sprang to my eyes, but not a single part of me screamed for help. I was too stunned, too shocked that the man I loved had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I stumbled when he finally released me, hitting the floor with a thud. My breath shook. My heart pounded. But the worst moment wasn't the pain. It was Diane's reaction. She clapped. Actually clapped. Finally, she shouted. Finally, you showed her how a wife should behave. Frank didn't say a word. He just watched. Eyes cold. Expression satisfied. Something inside me cracked then. Not with noise, not with drama, but with a quiet, devastating realization. This wasn't a family. This was a cage. And I was done pretending it wasn't. I pushed myself up slowly, my hand still on the part of my scalp throbbing from Derek's grip. My voice, when it came out, was steady, shockingly steady. I'm leaving. Derek scoffed. Where will you go? This is your home. Not anymore, I said. And for the first time that night, he looked afraid. I walked into the bedroom, grabbed a small bag, no clothes, just essentials, and without looking back at any of them, I stepped outside. The night air hit my skin like a rebirth. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. I was done being their prisoner. When I stepped out of that house, I expected the night air to feel cold. But it didn't. It felt strangely warm, like the world was offering me a small, quiet mercy after everything that happened inside those walls. The street was silent, the neighborhood still, and for the first time in months, I felt something I had forgotten I could feel. Control. I tightened my grip on the small bag I carried. It didn't have clothes or anything of comfort, just my wallet, my ID, and my phone. Things that reminded me I still existed outside the life Derek and his parents tried to trap me in. My scalp still burned from where he had pulled my hair, but I pushed the pain aside and kept walking. I didn't look back once. I was afraid that if I did, I might hesitate, and I couldn't afford hesitation anymore. My car was parked a block away. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and for a few seconds, I just sat there, staring at my own reflection in the dark window. My eyes were red, my face flushed, and there was a trembling in my hands I couldn't control. The tears didn't come, not yet. Instead, I felt numb. A strange, heavy numbness that wrapped around me like a thick blanket. I took a deep breath, turned the key, and drove away. Each mile I put between myself and that house felt like removing a layer of suffocation. I headed straight to the Navy base. It was late, past midnight, but the base never truly sleeps. Lights glowed along the fences, guards stood at the entrance, and the familiarity of that environment hit me like a wave. This place had always been my sanctuary, even when I didn't realize it. Here, I wasn't a wife being broken down. I was an officer. A woman with authority. A woman with worth. When the guard at the gate recognized me, he stepped forward. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. My throat tightened. My vision blurred. The numbness cracked open, and everything I had been holding inside began pouring out all at once. "Ma'am," he repeated gently. I swallowed hard. I need to get inside. Please." He didn't ask questions. He waved me through immediately. I parked near the administrative building and finally let go. My whole body shook as sobs tore out of me, raw, uncontrolled, painful sobs that made my chest ache. Everything I had endured, every insult, every threat, every humiliation, it rushed out in one violent release. I pressed my palms to my face, as if trying to hold myself together. I didn't realize someone was approaching until I heard a familiar voice. "Alyssa?" I looked up to see Sarah, my closest friend on base, jogging toward me with confusion turning into concern. She took one look at me and her expression shifted to alarm. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What happened?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She sat beside me, wrapped her arms around my shoulders, and just held me while I cried. She didn't push, didn't force words out of me. She just stayed with me, letting me break without judgment. When I finally managed to steady my breathing, she pulled back and gently brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers pausing when she noticed the redness on my scalp. "Who did this to you?" she asked quietly. I closed my eyes. "Derek." She inhaled sharply. "Alyssa, no." I nodded. "I left. I'm not going back." "Good," she said firmly. "You shouldn't." We walked inside the building, where the fluorescent lights felt too bright against my tired eyes. Sarah guided me to a small office and poured me water while I sat on a chair, still feeling like pieces of myself were scattered all over the room. "You need to contact Jag," she said. "Right now." Her certainty steadied me. I pulled out my phone, hands still shaking, and dialed the number for the Jag office. Even though it was late, emergency assistance was available. A calm voice answered, and when I told them what happened, they didn't hesitate. "Come in first thing in the morning," they said. "We'll help you file everything. You're safe now." Safe. It was a simple word, but after everything I escaped from, it felt like a promise I desperately needed. Sarah stayed with me the entire night, talking, listening, and reminding me with every breath that I wasn't alone. And for the first time since my marriage began to crumble, I started to believe her. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight I finally stopped running. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek's face twisted with anger, felt his hand ripping at my hair, heard Diane's applause echoing through the room like something out of a nightmare. But morning still came, as it always does, and with it came a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Sarah drove me to the JAG office. She didn't trust me to go alone. Not because she thought I was weak, but because she knew how much courage it takes to walk into a room and admit that the person you loved has hurt you. When we arrived, the receptionist guided us to a conference room where attorney James Porter was already waiting. He stood when we entered, a tall man with sharp eyes and a calm, composed presence that instantly made me feel like I was somewhere safe. He gestured toward the chairs. "Lieutenant Alyssa, please sit. I understand last night was difficult." I nodded and lowered myself into the seat. Sarah sat beside me like a shield. James opened a file. "I've reviewed your initial statement. Before we move forward, I need you to walk me through everything in detail. No matter how small. Nothing you say will be dismissed or doubted." There was something comforting about the firmness in his voice. I took a deep breath and began recounting everything. The months of pressure, the salary demands, the emotional manipulation, the insults, the comparisons, and finally, the violence. Several times, my voice shook, but I kept going. James didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. He took notes with precision, his expression shifting subtly with every new detail, as if building a case inside his mind layer by layer. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. Based on what you've told me, we have multiple charges we can pursue: domestic assault, coercive control, financial exploitation, harassment, and violation of marital rights. But to make this case airtight, we need evidence. I swallowed hard. I have some. James nodded. Let's gather everything. I opened my phone and handed it to him. First were the text messages, Derek's accusations, his late-night insults, and even a few voice messages where he yelled at me for being late from base. James listened to them carefully, his jaw tightening at certain points. Then came the recordings. I had started recording conversations weeks earlier, not because I expected things to get this bad, but because some part of me knew something wasn't right. There were audio clips of Diane belittling me, Frank demanding financial submission, and Derek ordering me to act like a real wife. When James heard Diane say, "Navy women ruin homes," he paused the recording and looked at me. This alone shows targeted emotional abuse. Next, I showed him the photos, the redness on my scalp, the faint marks on my arm from Derek's grip. Sarah had helped me take them earlier that morning. James documented everything, adding each piece into his file with meticulous care. Finally, we discussed witnesses. Sarah nodded immediately. I'll testify to everything Alyssa told me and her emotional condition last night. James made a note. Your testimony will help establish a timeline. When all the evidence was laid out on the table, it felt overwhelming, but not in the suffocating way I'd grown used to. This time, it felt like weight turning into power, like truth reclaiming its voice. James closed the file. Alyssa, this is a strong case. Very strong. Once we file, Derek and his parents will be served. They may try to deny everything, but the evidence is undeniable. And legally, you are protected now. A restraining order will be issued immediately. For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me, a spark, faint but real. Strength. Confidence. The realization that I wasn't just escaping anymore. I was fighting back. James stood. Remember, you did the right thing by coming forward. People in your position often stay silent. You didn't. That alone shows courage. I exhaled slowly. I don't feel brave. Sarah placed her hand over mine. You will, day by day. James nodded. And you won't be facing this alone. My job is to make sure justice is on your side. As we left the office, the sunlight felt different, warmer, brighter, almost like it was acknowledging something within me that had awakened. The fear was still there, yes, but now there was something stronger beside it. Determination. I wasn't just Alyssa the wife anymore. I was Alyssa the survivor. Alyssa the fighter. Alyssa, who was ready to take her life back. And for the first time, I believed I could win. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. Despite everything I had endured, I felt strangely calm that morning, like my mind had finally accepted that this was no longer a personal fight, but a legal reckoning. Sarah drove me to the courthouse, offering quiet reassurances along the way. I clutched the folder attorney James Porter had prepared, filled with evidence that now felt like armor. The courthouse was cold, its marble floors echoing with footsteps and murmurs. When we reached the courtroom doors, James greeted me with a steady nod. "You're ready," he said. And for the first time, I believed him. Inside, I saw them, Diane, Frank, and Derek, sitting together like a united front. Diane's arms were folded tightly across her chest. Frank's expression was stiff and rehearsed. But Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. For a moment, I wondered if he felt shame. But then he whispered something to Diane and smirked. No. Shame wasn't something he had ever learned. When Judge Harris entered, everyone rose. His presence was commanding, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. He glanced at the file on his desk, the file James had submitted, and then looked at us. "We are here today to review allegations of domestic assault, coercive control, and harassment." My breath caught. Hearing the words spoken aloud made everything feel more real. James began by presenting our case. He spoke with calm authority, detailing each incident with precision. He didn't dramatize anything he didn't need to. The truth was powerful enough on its own. Your Honor, James said, my client, Lieutenant Alyssa, has provided recordings, messages, photographs, and witness testimony that clearly establish a pattern of financial manipulation, emotional harassment, and physical assault by her husband, Derek, and continued psychological pressure from his parents, Diane and Frank. Diane immediately shot up from her seat. That is a lie. She's twisting everything. Judge Harris didn't even look at her. Mrs. Diane, sit down. You will speak only when asked. She sat, grumbling under her breath. James continued. He played the recordings in the courtroom, Diane calling me selfish, Frank demanding my salary, Derek yelling obscenities. Each voice echoed through the room like a confession. The courtroom grew eerily still. Then came the audio clip that changed everything. Diane's voice. Finally. Show her how a wife should behave. Frank's voice approving. Derek's shouting. And my cry of pain. Derek's attorney visibly flinched. Diane's face drained of color. Frank stiffened like a statue carved out of guilt. Judge Harris leaned forward. Is that your voice, Mrs. Diane? She swallowed. It's taken out of context. Really? James countered. The context seems painfully clear. Next came the photos of my injuries. Judge Harris studied each one carefully, his jaw tightening. Then the messages. Derek demanding access to my salary, threatening me if I didn't comply, belittling me for serving in the Navy. Every message shredded the image Derek tried to maintain. Now it was Derek's turn to speak. He stood slowly, hands clasped, pretending to be calm. Your Honor, Alyssa exaggerates. I never hurt her intentionally. She provoked me. She refused to be a proper wife. She disrespected my parents. Judge Harris raised a hand. Mr. Derek, restrain yourself. Are you denying the voice recordings? Derek hesitated. I was frustrated. And the injuries shown in these photos? The judge asked. He swallowed. She bruises easily. That was the moment James stopped him cold. Your Honor, the Navy medical officer has confirmed her injuries are consistent with physical assault, not accidental bruising. Silence. Deep, suffocating silence. Judge Harris finally closed the file. I've heard enough. Diane whispered frantically to Frank, who stared straight ahead, defeated. The judge adjusted his glasses. Based on the evidence, this court finds Derek guilty of domestic assault and coercive control. A restraining order is hereby issued, effective immediately. My breath trembled. Relief washed over me in waves. He continued, Diane and Frank are also found responsible for harassment and financial coercion. Both are ordered to pay fines and are restricted from contacting or approaching Alyssa in any capacity. Diane gasped. This is outrageous. Judge Harris didn't blink. Mrs. Diane, another outburst will result in contempt of court. She fell silent. And lastly, Judge Harris said gently, turning to me, Lieutenant Alyssa, you acted with courage. This court acknowledges your service and your bravery in coming forward. My eyes blurred with tears, this time from validation, not pain. When the hearing ended, Derek stormed out first, his pride shattered. Diane followed, muttering curses under her breath. Frank lingered for a moment, looking at me with something like regret before turning away. I didn't chase closure. I didn't need their apologies. Justice was enough. Freedom was enough. As Sarah wrapped her arm around my shoulders and James nodded approvingly, I felt something inside me settle. The storm was ending, and sunlight, warm, healing sunlight, was finally breaking through. The day after the court hearing, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, quiet. Not peace exactly, but the absence of fear. The kind of quiet that settles over you after a storm has passed, and you're standing among the broken pieces, realizing you survived. Sarah made me breakfast and insisted I eat, though I could barely taste the food. My body felt light, almost unfamiliar, as if I had been carrying weight for years without realizing it, and now it was finally being lifted. I knew what I had to do next. The decision had already been growing inside me long before the violence, but now it was certain, irreversible. I needed to file for divorce. I drove to Attorney James Porter's office with steady hands. When I walked in, he looked up and immediately understood why I was there. Without a single wasted word, he opened a folder and slid the paperwork in front of me. "Alyssa," he said, "you are more than justified. And with the court's ruling yesterday, this will go smoothly." I studied the papers. My name at the top. Derek's beneath it. A marriage that had begun with love now reduced to legal lines on white paper. Oddly, I didn't feel sadness. Not anymore. What I felt was something deeper, clarity. "I'm ready," I whispered. James handed me a pen. "Then, let's end this." My signature glided across the page with a finality that sent a chill through me. Not fear, liberation. James filed the documents immediately. It would be official soon. Derek wouldn't have access to me, my salary, or my life ever again. The restraining order guaranteed that he couldn't come within 200 yards of me. His criminal conviction finalized the last thread he had tried to hold over me. By afternoon, it was done. The legal system had given me something Derek and his parents tried desperately to take: my autonomy, my safety, my voice. But I still felt like something was missing, like a chapter needed a final closing scene. And without thinking too much about it, I drove toward the shore, to the place where I had always gone when life felt heavier than my body could carry. The ocean. The Navy had taught me to respect the sea, to understand its moods, its dangers, and its depths. But standing there that evening, still in my uniform from the court hearing, watching the sun melt into the horizon, I felt something I never had before. I felt the ocean reflecting me back at myself. Wild, powerful, untamed, unbroken. The waves crashed against the rocks with the same determination I felt rising inside me. The sky glowed in shades of orange and pink, stretching endlessly forward like a future I had only just started to believe I deserved. I walked toward the shoreline, letting the cold water rush over my boots. The air smelled like salt and possibility. My hair blew across my face in the wind, and I closed my eyes, breathing in deeply. For the first time in months, my lungs didn't hurt. My chest didn't feel tight. My heart didn't feel bruised. I whispered softly into the wind, not expecting an answer. I made it. The ocean roared back, as if agreeing. I thought about the girl I had been when I first put on my Navy uniform, strong, hopeful, determined. Somewhere along the way, I had let someone else's cruelty convince me I had lost those qualities. But standing there now, I realized something powerful. They never left me. They were buried, hidden under fear, under manipulation, under the weight of a marriage that tried to suffocate me. But I had dug myself out. I had saved myself. I had rebuilt myself. A faint smile touched my lips as I imagined the next chapter of my life. Deployments, promotions, friendships, freedom. A life where no one dictated my worth. A life where no one clipped my wings. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky shifted into twilight, I whispered one final vow to myself. I will never let anyone silence me again. And with that promise, I turned away from the ocean. Not because I needed escape anymore, but because I finally knew the strength that lived inside me. A strength no one could take away. Thank you for listening to Alyssa's story. If her journey moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life inspired stories. Your support helps these voices reach more people, and I truly appreciate it. Stay connected, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.